Well, Yuval, thank you very much for doing this interview and having you here in Athens.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I want to talk today a bit about democracy, about artificial intelligence, technology, and so on, all the things that you've written on. And the first question is whether you think that democracy and the liberal order, the liberal ideas are under threat now by populism, autocracy, and so on.
Yes, they are under threat. But then again, democracy is always under threat because it demands a lot of preconditions in order to thrive. Democracy is like a rare flower that can't grow everywhere, whereas dictatorship is like a weed that, anywhere you throw it, it can grow. As for liberal values, yes, they are under attack, but we should also remind ourselves that actually they are more widespread and stronger than ever before in history. People even don't understand what liberalism means. So a simple test whether you're a liberal is to ask 3 questions. Do you think people should have the right to choose their own government instead of just obeying some king? Do you think people should have the right to choose their own profession instead of just working in the same thing that their parents did? Like your parents were a peasant, you'll be a peasant? And thirdly, do you think people should have the right to choose their own spouse instead of just marrying whoever their elders or priests choose for them? If you answer yes to these 3 questions, you're a liberal. And today more people answer yes than in any previous time. Even the people who call themselves conservatives today are actually usually more liberal in their views than the radical liberals of a century ago.
Yeah, but it definitely feels like the jungle is growing around us, like Kagan has said.
Yeah.
In terms of conspiracy theories, mistrust of authority, of democracy, and so on. How do you fight this back?
So many ways. But if you focus on the issue of conspiracy theory, then you can't fight it back just by bombarding people with scientific facts and statistics and so forth, because humans think in stories, not in numbers and data points. You need a good story. And it's difficult because the truth is usually far more complicated and painful. When you tell a completely fictional story, you can tell a story which is simple and which will flatter people so they would like it. The truth is usually more complicated and more painful. So we need a bridge between the scientific world and the general population. And I see my job as being part of that bridge, of taking the latest findings and discoveries of science and telling them in a way which will be accessible and even fun for the general public to engage with.
You've written about a class of people which is going to feel useless in the future because of AI and the improvement of technology. And the question I have is, there are these people who are scared. They see the train of globalization going by fast. They want to get off the train and so on. Is this their revenge to believe in conspiracy theories, not to trust politicians, not to trust science and so on, in some way?
In some way you can say yes, it is a revenge, but it is a revenge that hurts them as much as anybody else. Just by believing some conspiracy theory, it will not stop the march of technology, it will not reverse globalization, and it will not provide you with a job if you are unemployed. I think the big challenge we are facing, if you talk about the job market and the loss of jobs, is not that technology is completely destroying jobs. Yes, technology is destroying some jobs, but it is also creating new jobs. The problem is retraining and reinventing yourself. To stay in the game in the 21st century, you will have to retrain and reinvent yourself not just once in your lifetime, but at least several times. And this is extremely difficult. You know, throughout history, life was usually divided into two parts. When you're young, you mostly learn. You develop your skills, you acquire new abilities. Then when you're older, you mostly work. You make use of what you learned as a young person. Of course, you learn new things as you go along, but mostly you have this division. Now it's completely broken, this division. By the time you're 40 or 50, most of what you learned in school will be completely irrelevant. The skills you acquired will no longer be necessary. So you will need to reinvent yourself. And for that, you need the ability to keep learning throughout your life, and even more so, the psychological ability to retain a flexible mind, to keep reinventing yourself. You know, if you were a taxi driver, and now they don't need taxi drivers anymore because you have self-driving vehicles, but you need more yoga teachers, or you need more designer of virtual worlds. So it's not just about learning a new skill. It's sometimes even acquiring a new personality. Yoga teachers usually have a somewhat different personality than a taxi driver. So would you be able to do that or not? That's the key for survival in the 21st century.
But are we asking too much from the average person?
Probably yes, but history will not give discounts to anybody. You know, if you're left behind and you can't do it, you can't come complaining to history, wait, slow down. It's too fast for me. I mean, we've seen it before in a way in the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution, when a few countries industrialized first, like Britain and France and the US. Most countries remained far behind. Even if they heard something about industrialization, they said, no, this is, the British can do that. We have more urgent stuff to do in Greece or in Egypt or in China. And within a couple of decades, all these countries were either officially or unofficially British and American and German colonies. And it's happening again with AI, with biotechnology. And again, there is a divide. A few countries are leading the world in this new industrial revolution. Most countries remain far, far behind. And the gap now is even bigger. In the 19th century, there was a gap between somebody who had steamships and railroads and somebody who didn't. But the gap between somebody who masters AI and somebody who doesn't is much bigger. To become a colony in the 21st century, it's not about tanks entering your country and taking over. You don't need to send the tanks in. You just need to take the data out. We are now seeing a new form of imperialism. You can call it data colonialism, when it's all about the data. Just imagine the situation, say, in Greece in 20 years, when somebody in Moscow or Beijing or Washington has the entire personal data of every politician, every journalist, every judge, every military officer in Greece. They know your entire medical record, your ailments, your problems, your past diseases. They have your entire sexual life. They know every bribe you took. They know every joke you ever told about some group or minority or whatever. Would Greece still be an independent country in such a scenario? Or would it be a data colony?
I guess the counter-argument to that is that a child in Somalia or Yemen or somewhere else, they have tremendous opportunities they couldn't think of because of this new world.
I'm not saying it's all bad. I mean, there are enormous opportunities and enormous dangers, but the thing is, it's extremely stressful. The child in Somalia may have new opportunities that didn't exist before, but to make use of this opportunity is extremely demanding. It's extremely stressful. This is what I was talking earlier about the need to keep learning and reinventing yourself throughout your life. It's not like you learn how to cultivate your field, like you're born into a farming community. As a child, you learn how to plant and harvest and drive the bullock cart and whatever. And throughout your life, you basically make use of that. No, that will not be enough anymore. And this need to, keep learning and keep changing, it's so stressful. I mean, we just now had this conversation with the CEO, with the president of Microsoft. And you asked me what I wanted to ask him. And in the end, I asked some important question. But actually, the question that bothers me as an individual is, why do you keep changing Windows all the time? That, every I dread this notification that, okay, Windows 10 is over. Now you have to install Windows 20 on your computer. And I don't just leave it as it is.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah. You've talked about COVID as a watershed moment in terms of data surveillance and so on. Mm-hmm. Why are you so worried about it? That it will fall in the wrong hands, or that the autocracies will become more efficient?
Yeah,
What's your main concern?
It's a power that never existed before. It's not all bad, of course. It can provide wonderful healthcare systems also. But every new major power is a major threat. And again, looking back to the Industrial Revolution as kind of the historical perspective. In the end, industry gave humanity enormous power. In the end, looking from the perspective of the early 21st century, this power benefited us. The average person today in the world, in most of the world, there are exceptions, but in most of the world, has a better life than 200 years ago because of industry. Because of industry, we have better medicine, we have more food, we have better infrastructure. So, you measure things like child mortality. It has gone down from, say, 50% 200 years ago to 5% in all the world today, and less than 1% in developed countries. That's wonderful. But we had a steep learning process, a difficult learning process, when humanity needed to learn how to use the power of industry. In the middle, we had things like colonialism, the 2 world wars, Nazism, Stalinism. Eventually we learned, but we had to pass through these trial and error process. Now we have even bigger powers than industry, than steam engines and trains and cars. AI and total surveillance is much, much more powerful than trains. And we don't have any room for error. We can't survive another world war. If we have another Stalin, it will be not only far worse than the original one, it might be irreversible. That once you install this system, it has so much power that it will not, humans will not be able to change it anymore. The threat of AI is not just for democracies. It threatens authoritarian regimes even more. If I think which are the first countries that AI will effectively take over, I think it will be countries like North Korea or China. Because when you already have, to take over a country like the US, it's so complicated. Because power is diffused everywhere. But when power is concentrated and hierarchical, and you inject AI, it's much easier for the algorithms to take over. It's not like a science fiction movie. The robots are taking over. It's a gradual shift in authority. More and more decisions are taken by the algorithms, and the humans, they don't understand. They trust their algorithm, but they don't understand the decisions it is taking. And increasingly, they find that they are becoming like puppets in the hands of this algorithm. And this can happen to China far quicker than to the US because it is so centralized. And, you just think about something like appointments. One of the most important things in a system like the Chinese system is appointing people to position. You'll be mayor, you'll be head of this section, you'll be head of this department. Now, increasingly, these decisions, at least on the lower level, will be taken by an AI system that gathers all the data on you from the moment you are born, what you did in kindergarten, what you did in school. It has all the data, and it analyzes it, and it decides, okay, this person will now be mayor of this town. This person will head this department. And nobody understands why. Because the calculations are far beyond the capacity of the human brain. And, so still the members of the Politburo, they are the result of human choice. But increasingly they look around and they see maybe that the entire party has been taken over by the algorithm. And they are powerless now to stop that or to change that.
But the ultimate Orwellian nightmare for you, the way I gather it, is a machine deciding whether you're going to get a bank loan, or a dictator knowing whether you're angry or happy with his decision, right? I mean, that's...
It's not necessarily evil. It can be used for good purposes too, of course. But if it falls into the wrong hands, then it will create a totalitarian regime that is far beyond anything the Soviet Union would look like a libertarian paradise. And, in a way, even the scarier thing is that it's not evil, it's not Stalin, it's not Hitler, and still, it challenges the very meaning of human life because we are used to thinking about life as a drama of decision-making. Every great work of art, you think about ancient Greek theater, it's always about some big decision. Somebody, the hero, the heroine, Antigone needs to make a decision. Oedipus needs to make a decision. Now, what happens in a world when increasingly all the decisions are taken by an algorithm that knows you better? At first, the algorithm tells you which TV shows to watch, which books to read. Increasingly, it tells you what to study, whom to marry, where to live. And we don't have any philosophical models for understanding such a life. What it means to live such a life in which all your important decisions, all your life is being managed by this outside system.
One thing I admire about you is how you bring history and philosophy together. And one question I have is, I observe around the world that strong leaders are on the wrong side of history, right? They're not the liberals or the people who really want to move forward. How do you explain this?
It's not that the good guys always win. Very often the bad guys win. We don't notice it because then the bad guys write history and depict themselves as the good guys. But so many times in history, it's the bad guys who won. And, I try to be optimistic about the situation we are here now, but there is no guarantee. I often say that one of the most powerful forces in history is human stupidity. Humans often make bad decisions. We do it as individuals. In our personal lives, we often make bad decisions. We also do it as collectives. The situation now is particularly fragile because in all previous cases in history, you make a bad decision, you have another chance. But now, at least some decisions, if you make a bad decision, that's it. You will never get the chance to rectify it. And the thing is that there is just this huge, huge gap between human power and human wisdom. We are far more powerful than wise. We are very, very good in developing new powerful technologies, but we are not good at all in knowing how best to use these technologies. And we've seen it throughout history. It's not something new.
Reading your books, you had the idea that you were thinking that man was going to feel like God, maybe 50 years from now. Is that going to be the case, or is it going to be a citizen scared by the God that has created, by the forces has unleashed?
There are many scenarios. I don't know what will actually happen 50 years from now because it depends on the decisions we make in the coming months and the coming years. What I try to do in my writing is to map different possibilities, different scenarios. Many of these scenarios are contradictory. They can't all happen. And I don't know which of them will come true. The whole point of making these predictions is not to turn out to be right, like in 100 years I will say, I told you so. The point is that you warn people about the most dangerous scenarios in the hope that they will make good decisions that will prevent these scenarios from happening.
You've written about Greece, regarding COVID and so on. And I wonder, what has really struck you about Greece? You know, you've been walking in the streets, you've seen some people.
Yes, I mean, the difference with Israel is really amazing. I mean, we were just coming from the airport and we saw people queuing in a bus station, like 2 meters apart with masks. That's amazing. I mean, you know, if we were in Switzerland, we would say, okay, these are the Swiss. But, you know, Greeks and Israelis, both Mediterranean, they are not so different. And in Greece, we were really struck by the level of cooperation that you see from the ordinary citizens. I don't know what were the reasons for it, but I would say that this indicates a much higher level of trust between individuals and between the citizens and the government than, unfortunately, we have back at home in Israel.
We have surprised ourselves, I think. But you've been turning your books into a comic now.
Yeah.
Tell me, is this a challenge? Is it fun?
It's a big challenge and it is a lot of fun. I mean, I'm not doing it by myself. I don't know how to draw. I draw like a 5-year-old kid. I'm in a team with 2 artists, Danielle and David from Belgium and from France, and we're working on this together. And it's really a very interesting experience because we experiment with different ways of telling history, of telling science. So we have one chapter about human cooperation, and we follow the conventions of superhero movies to explain this. Like the key for human cooperation is believing in common stories. So we created this superhero, Dr. Fiction, which she personifies this human superpower of telling stories and thereby making people cooperate. So the entire chapter is told not like a normal history book, but like a superhero movie. And then we have another chapter about the disappearance of the big animals in more than 10,000 years ago. As humans spread around the planet, more and more big animals disappeared, like the mammoth or the saber-toothed cats. More than 90% of the big animals of Australia disappeared. So instead of telling all this like a typical science book, we follow the conventions of a detective movie. Again, we created this fictional character, Detective Lopez, and she is traveling around the planet on the track of the worst serial killers ever, ecological serial killers, who killed all these big animals. So, I mean, it's still science. We tried at all the facts, we researched them very carefully, but the package is we experiment with reality TV and with so many different genres of how to tell stories, how to tell science, in order to reach as wide an audience as possible. People who don't read typical science books, I hope they will read and enjoy this book.
Thank you, Val. I look forward to reading this and I hope you enjoy your stay in Greece.
Thank you.